I never expected a car ride to feel like this. The engine hummed quietly, the road stretched under a late summer sky, and somehow, the air between us had thickened into something unspoken, almost electric. She was sitting beside me, her hand resting just near mine on the console. I noticed it because it lingered a fraction longer than necessary when she adjusted the map on her lap, the edge of her fingers brushing mine. My chest tightened, a rhythm I hadn't felt since, well, never like this. Her name was Marissa. My friend's mother, yes, but more than that, she carried herself with a kind of quiet grace that made the sunlight through the windshield seem dull in comparison. She laughed softly at a joke my friend had texted me. Though the laugh was for me, I felt it in my ribs, a warmth that spread without permission. I tried not to stare, but her eyes caught mine, and there was that flicker again, an acknowledgement, subtle, fleeting, but enough to make me aware of how I was suddenly acutely conscious of every detail. The curl of her hair around her ear, the slight crease near her smile, the scent of her perfume that was delicate, a hint of vanilla and something deeper I couldn't name. "Still the same as always," she said, and I realized she was speaking to me. I swallowed, uncertain how to answer. My voice felt smaller than I wanted it to. I guess," I said, and immediately wished I had just stayed quiet. A pause followed. One of those moments where the world narrows down to the small space between two people. Her fingers brushed against mine again, this time more deliberately, or maybe it was just my imagination. My hand twitched slightly, almost reaching for hers, and I caught myself, my heart thudding louder than the engine. "You're different," she said finally, her tone soft, curious. "Not the little boy I remember." I laughed nervously, though it came out uneven. "I've grown, I guess." She smiled, but it wasn't the playful smile of a mother teasing a child. It was warmer, measured, and maybe a little regretful. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror, and the way she looked, as if she were trying to read a part of me I hadn't yet shown anyone, made my stomach knot. The air seemed heavier now, charged with things either of us said. Her shoulder almost touched mine as she leaned to grab a bottle of water, and I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the car hitting a bump. I focused on the road ahead, but my eyes kept drifting toward her, taking in the curve of her neck, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the quiet confidence that still carried an edge of vulnerability. We drove in silence for a while, but it wasn't empty. Every glance, every subtle movement, spoke volumes I couldn't yet put into words. I wanted to ask her if she felt it too, but the words lodged in my throat. Then, just as I thought I might lose myself in that quiet tension, she turned fully toward me, and her voice dropped, intimate and almost teasing. "Are you going to tell me how it feels to be noticed like this?" Before I could answer, the car jolted over a pothole. My grip tightened on the wheel, hers brushed against mine again, and in that split second, the sound of the engine, the warmth of the sun, the tension between us, it all seemed suspended, waiting. And then the phone on the dashboard rang, piercing the fragile bubble we built. Her hand moved to answer it, but our eyes met one last time, and in that look, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The camp was quiet when we arrived, the kind of silence that makes ordinary sounds, footsteps on gravel, the snap of a branch in the wind, feel magnified. I parked the car, trying to calm the residual thrum in my chest, but she leaned forward, brushing a hand against my shoulder as she reached for the seatbelt. That small contact sent a wave of heat I couldn't hide. "You've changed," she murmured again, softer this time, almost hesitant. She didn't elaborate, and maybe I didn't want her to. There was history in her tone, something unsaid that made me want to unravel it, piece by piece. I wanted to ask why she always spoke like she remembered me, the kid I had been, the one who had been loud, awkward, and invisible to everyone except her. But instead, I let my silence answer. I had never been good with words when it mattered most, and the weight of her gaze made me feel both young and uncomfortably exposed. Marissa had always seemed untouchable, even when I was 12 and sneaking glances at her over board games or backyard barbecues. Now, though, the distance between us wasn't just years, it was the carefully built walls we both carried. Her laugh no longer echoed through my memory as carefree. It now came with a trace of regret, a subtle tension that reminded me she had lived a life filled with choices I could only guess at. We walked along the path to the cabins. I kept stealing glances at her, noticing the curve of her neck as she adjusted her hair, the way the sun painted gold across her shoulders. She seemed aware, too, lingering just a heartbeat too close as we passed a low branch or offering a hand when the ground tilted beneath my foot. Every brush of skin felt amplified, every small gesture weighted with meaning neither of us addressed aloud. "You seem different," she said finally, her voice lowering so only I could hear. It wasn't a comment on my looks. It was something deeper, on how I carried myself, the way my quiet observation had grown into something more deliberate. I swallowed, words failing me, but my hand brushed hers as we passed a gate. A jolt ran through me, electric, undeniable, but I acted casual, letting my fingers slide away as though nothing had happened. I could feel her pulse under my touch, subtle, quick, and I knew she felt it too. I've been away," I said finally, breaking the fragile pause. "I mean, out of the city. Doing my own thing. Trying to grow." Her eyes softened, and I caught the smallest flicker of something almost tender. "I can see that," she said, but her voice carried a caution I understood all too well. She had lived long enough to know desire could be dangerous, messy, and often forbidden. The thought made my stomach tighten. The risk wasn't just in what we felt, it was in the world that would never fully understand it. We reached the cabin. She opened the door first, and I followed, our shoulders brushing. She turned to me, a half-smile tugging at her lips, and held my gaze a fraction too long. The air between us hummed, charged with all the things we couldn't say. Then she leaned in slightly, pretending to check a corner of the room, and the tip of her shoulder brushed mine. I froze, feeling my breath catch. A laugh, soft and low, escaped her, half amusement, half something I couldn't name, and for a moment, the world shrank to that cabin, the heat of her skin, the quiet ache of proximity. "I guess some things don't change," she said, voice trailing, eyes flicking down and then back up at me. I wanted to speak, to reach for her hand and hold it, to close the distance, but I stayed still, letting the tension linger. And in that pause, in the small space where nothing was said but everything was felt, I realized our bond had shifted. We were no longer just family acquaintances. Something unspoken had begun to weave itself into the quiet corners of our day, binding us in ways both thrilling and terrifying. And just like that, a gentle knock at the cabin door pulled me out of the moment, leaving us both poised between longing and restraint, the electricity between us humming silently in the warm afternoon air. The evening settled in quickly, the golden light fading to a dusky pink, and the camp felt smaller somehow, like it had shrunk around the tension between us. Marissa and I were unpacking the supplies in silence, each movement deliberate, the faint brush of her hand against mine making my pulse stutter. "Careful with that," she said, reaching over to steady a box, her fingers grazing my wrist. I swallowed. The touch lingered longer than necessary, almost a question. Almost a dare. I caught her looking at me as she adjusted the blanket in the cabin. There was something in her eyes, hesitation, longing, and maybe a spark of mischief. I wanted to lean in, to let my hand find hers, but the memory of my friend's voice, or anyone walking in, held me back. A sudden knock on the cabin door made us both jump. My heart raced, not from the interruption, but from how close we had been, shoulder to shoulder, hands barely apart. "It's probably just someone checking in," I whispered, though the sound of my own voice startled me. She smiled, that half-soft, half-wary smile that made my chest ache. We stepped apart slightly, but the space was only inches. Her presence pressed against me in a way that felt impossibly intimate. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, feel the warmth radiating from her side, and every instinct in me wanted to bridge the small gap. "Maybe we should," she started, then stopped, eyes darting toward the door as if suddenly aware of the world outside our bubble. The hesitation in her voice was mirrored in my own, the thought that something forbidden hovered dangerously close. The silence that followed was thick. Our glances met and lingered too long, too loaded with things either of us said. My fingers twitched, almost reaching for hers. Her lips parted slightly, a breath caught, and I could have sworn the world held its own breath with us. I imagined it, the brush of her lips, the closeness, the heat of a moment that could change everything. But guilt flickered, at her life, at the taboo of it, at what people would think. I pulled slightly back, just enough to respect the boundary, but she leaned forward too, drawn in the same invisible gravity. Every small gesture was amplified, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the tremor in her hand as she picked up a mug, the faint pulse at her wrist that I couldn't ignore. The room contracted until it felt like it was only her, only me, and the impossible tension between us. Then my phone buzzed on the table. A text from my friend. A reminder of the world beyond our quiet, dangerous orbit. I stared at the screen, the moment broken, but only for a heartbeat. When I looked up, she was closer than ever, her arm brushing mine as she moved to place a blanket on the other side of the bed. My hand moved slightly, almost touching hers, and she didn't pull away. Our eyes locked, and in that look, I felt the unspoken, the desire, the fear, the electricity crackling in silence. Her lips twitched into the smallest smile, a silent acknowledgement of what we both wanted but dared not name. My heart thundered. For a moment, nothing else existed, no friend, no world, just the dangerous pull between us. And then, without a word, we both froze as a door creaked in the distance, reminding us we weren't alone. Yet somehow, in that brief, fleeting proximity, we had been pulled closer than ever, closer than reason would allow, closer than fear could undo. The tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it had doubled, threading itself through every glance, every pause, every heartbeat that followed. The night had fallen, thick and warm, and the cabin smelled faintly of pine and the lingering hint of her perfume. I could hear her moving across the room, the soft scrape of her shoes on the wooden floor, and each sound made my pulse spike. She stopped beside me suddenly, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her side. I turned slightly, and the light from the lamp caught her face, soft, beautiful, and impossibly inviting. Her hair fell across her cheek, and without thinking, my fingers brushed it back. The tiny contact made her shiver, a sound caught between a breath and a sigh. "I shouldn't," she started, voice low, but her words trailed off. The hesitation in her tone mirrored the tension that had been building between us for days, weeks maybe. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that nothing else mattered, but the words lodged in my throat. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough that our shoulders touched. My chest pressed against hers, and I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breath. The world outside, the rules, the taboos, the expectations, blurred into irrelevance. "You know we shouldn't," she whispered, eyes glancing down and then back up at me, the faintest trace of vulnerability cracking through her usual composure. "I know," I said, my voice barely more than a rasp. "But I can't stop noticing you." Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, and then she paused, the words stuck in the space between us. My hand rested near hers, itching to close the gap, and I could feel the tremor in her fingers. Every small motion, the brush of her arm, the tilt of her head, the way her scent wrapped around me, was overwhelming. "I didn't mean for it to feel like this," she said finally, her voice soft but urgent. "I never imagined." She swallowed, as though swallowing the weight of years, regrets, and unsaid words all at once. "I know," I whispered, leaning closer, my voice brushing against her ear. "I feel it too." The room seemed to shrink around us, every sound amplified, the faint hum of the heater, the wind brushing against the window, the rapid thrum of my heart. I could feel her breath mingling with mine, the warmth of her skin, the tiny tremble in her hand as it hovered near mine. Her eyes searched mine, questioning, daring, and the honesty in that gaze made me want to close the distance completely. I could almost feel the brush of her lips against mine, the moment that would change everything, but the hesitation lingered, fragile and tantalizing. A laugh, nervous and soft, escaped her lips, and it was enough to break the spell just slightly. She stepped back, barely, but enough that the air between us felt charged, taut, ready to snap. "I can't not think about this," I admitted, voice low, raw. Not think about you. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. She reached out, hand hovering just an inch from my chest, and in that single motion, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The distance was maddeningly close, impossible yet inevitable. And then she spoke, words slow and deliberate, filled with a mixture of daring and fear. If you just... Her sentence hung there, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. My lips were an inch from hers, my hand aching to touch, hers poised to meet me halfway. The moment teetered on the edge of everything we'd held back, everything forbidden and irresistible. And then, a sudden crack from the window, the wind flinging the latch open, jolted us apart. Her hair whipped across her face, and we both gasped, the moment suspended, unresolved, and more electric than ever. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the cabin in golden strips, painting everything with an almost cruel clarity. I was pouring coffee when Marissa came in, holding 2 mugs, and I caught the way her eyes flicked to mine, hesitant, questioning, lingering. I need to tell you something, she said, setting the mugs down. Her hand brushed mine for just a second, and I felt that familiar spark, sharp and sudden, as if every nerve in my body had been lit on fire. I looked up at her, sensing the weight behind her words. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, biting her lip. That small gesture made my chest tighten. I know this changes things, and maybe it shouldn't, but... Her hand rested near mine again, trembling slightly, though she pulled it away just before our fingers could touch fully. The pause stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, aware of every inch of space between us, every subtle tremor, every suppressed longing. I saw you the other day, outside the cabin, she finally said, her voice dropping low. Not by accident. I've been watching you, noticing how you look at me, how you react, and... She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the floor. I can't pretend I haven't been thinking about you, too. I felt my stomach knot, a mix of relief, fear, and desire. Relief because I wasn't alone in this feeling, fear because admitting it made everything more dangerous, more real. And desire because she had just stripped away the walls we had built, exposing the raw, tender nerve beneath. I've been thinking about you, I admitted, my voice low, rough. Every time we're alone, every glance, every touch. I stopped, aware of how close she was, aware of how the air between us seemed to thrum with unsaid words. Her eyes lifted to mine, a flicker of vulnerability shining through her usual composure. She stepped closer, and the brush of her shoulder against mine made my breath catch. My fingers itched to reach out, to close that fraction of distance, but the risk was tangible. Every sound, the wind through the trees, the distant chatter of campers, reminded us how exposed we were. I know, she whispered, and it felt like a confession, a surrender. Her hand lifted slightly, hovering near my chest, and I could feel the pull, magnetic and impossible to ignore. And then she stepped back, a fraction of hesitation, and the room seemed to shrink around us. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the desire that mirrored mine, the guilt that both of us carried, and the awareness that the world outside would never understand. I shouldn't, she murmured, brushing past me as she went to the window. The subtle contact, our bodies too close to be accidental, sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to reach out, to stop her, to hold her, but the fear of what this meant, it was paralyzing. Yet, in that brief moment, we were more exposed than ever. Every look, every brush of skin, every heartbeat between us was louder than the words we dared not speak. We were teetering on the edge of something that could change everything, or ruin it entirely. I finally stepped closer, closing the distance, my voice low and trembling, almost a whisper. I don't care about the risk. I can't hide how I feel anymore. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. The world outside, the rules, the age gap, the fear, all of it faded, leaving just the raw, unbearable tension between us. And then, just as I reached out again, to bridge the final inches, she paused, biting her lip, and whispered a single word that would decide everything. Don't. The word hung between us, heavy with warning and desire, daring me to defy it, tempting me to step forward anyway. And in that suspended moment, we both knew nothing would ever be the same. The cabin was quiet again, the world outside reduced to the distant murmur of the camp and the occasional rustle of leaves. We were standing in the middle of the room, so close I could feel the warmth radiating off her body, every inch of distance between us charged with months of longing and restraint. Her eyes held mine, wide, searching, and I felt the pull of something I had tried to ignore for too long. My hand itched to reach out, to close the last impossible inches, but I hesitated, aware of everything at stake, the age, the taboo, the consequences. "I can't not think about this," I whispered, my voice low, trembling. She didn't answer immediately, just tilted her head slightly, letting the silence speak for her. The subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint brush of her hair against my arm as she leaned in slightly, it was enough to make the world shrink to the space between us. "I know," she murmured finally, almost as if reading my thoughts. Her breath brushed against my cheek, warm and fleeting. "And I shouldn't, but I can't stop either." Every word, every pause, was electric. I could feel her heartbeat against my hand when I dared to rest it near hers. We both knew the gravity of this moment, that one step could either shatter everything or bring clarity we had been avoiding. "I don't want to hide it anymore," I said, letting my hand hover over hers, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. "Not from you. Not from me." Her lips parted slightly, the faintest shiver passing through her. She leaned in closer, the distance impossibly small, and the room seemed to hold its breath with us. My chest pressed against hers lightly, tentative but deliberate, and every sense sharpened, the warmth of her, the scent of her hair, the sound of her quiet intake of breath. For a long moment neither of us moved. It was a perfect, fragile pause, suspended between desire and fear, temptation and reason. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Do you want this, even knowing everything?" I swallowed, aware of the weight of my answer, and stepped just enough closer to close the gap. "Yes," I said, voice low and raw. "I want this, with you, if you'll let me." Her eyes glistened, and a small, almost shy smile tugged at her lips. She tilted her head, brushing her forehead lightly against mine, and I felt a release of tension I hadn't known I was carrying. It wasn't perfection, it wasn't neat, but it was honest, human, and entirely ours. Her hand found mine at last, fingers entwining, small shocks running through both of us at the contact. We didn't need words anymore, the touch said everything. The months of longing, restraint, guilt, and unspoken desire condensed into a single, trembling connection. "I've wanted this," she admitted, her voice a whisper. "Longer than I realized." "And I've been waiting," I replied, my thumb brushing hers, "for you to notice me the way I've noticed you." The air between us settled finally, not with the certainty of resolution, but with a clarity of understanding. We were no longer hiding from our feelings, no longer guessing at what the other thought. The space between us had been crossed, and though the world outside still posed questions and risks, within the small cabin, in the warmth and closeness of this shared moment, everything felt startlingly, beautifully real. We stood there, chest to chest, fingers locked, and for the first time, we didn't have to pretend. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently through the cabin window, soft and golden, catching the edges of her hair. I watched her move across the room, small, natural gestures, stretching, brushing a loose strand behind her ear, and for the first time, I saw her not as an unattainable figure but as someone entirely human, tender, and achingly close. We didn't speak much at first. Words weren't needed. She sat across from me at the small table, her hand resting near mine, and I reached out almost instinctively. Fingers intertwined. The simple contact grounded us, made the world shrink to just the two of us. "You're really here," she said softly, eyes meeting mine. There was no teasing now, no hesitation, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had shifted, what we had dared to cross. "I am," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "And I don't plan on leaving." She leaned in, resting her forehead lightly against mine. I could feel the warmth of her breath, the steady pulse of her heart, and in that small space, the months of tension, longing, and unspoken desire seemed to settle. We had crossed the impossible, the taboo, and somehow found a place where it felt right, messy, human, and beautifully ours. She smiled, small, real, and I felt a surge of something deeper than attraction, connection, trust, and the quiet thrill of finally being understood. I brushed a finger across her cheek, and she tilted her head into the touch, her lips parting slightly in a breathless, contented sigh. We didn't rush. There was no dramatic declaration, no grand gesture beyond the simple, intimate closeness of being near each other. She rested her head against my shoulder as we sat side by side, our hands still entwined, and I felt the incredible weight of years and hesitation lift, leaving only warmth, quiet joy, and the solid certainty that we belonged here, together. Outside, the camp carried on, voices, laughter, footsteps. But inside, the cabin had become a private world, small and alive with the kind of intimacy that didn't need explanation. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every shared breath reinforced the truth we both now knew: age, risk, and past expectations no longer mattered. What mattered was this: us, present, real, and free to finally feel without restraint. "I never imagined," she murmured, letting herself relax fully against me. "Neither did I," I admitted, voice low, but steady. "But I'm glad we did." Her hand tightened around mine, and she tilted her head to kiss my temple softly. It was a quiet, perfect gesture, tender, sensual without being overt, and it said everything words could never capture. We stayed like that for a long while, watching the sunlight shift, listening to the world move on outside, knowing that what had begun in silence, hesitation, and stolen moments had now found a solid, human heartbeat between us. And in that quiet, shared warmth, everything settled. We were together, fully and undeniably, in a way that felt messy, real, and utterly right.